The story of Avatar the Airbender is one of many things. Primarily, it's a coming-of-age story that centers around a protagonist who's between being a kid and an adult, who's trying to find his footing in a world that expects too much of him. To many, this theme is all but too familiar. One of the defining moments in Aang's life, however, was his decision to run away, attempting to hide from the responsibilities that came with being the Avatar. He carried guilt with him for much of his life, feeling like he had betrayed his friends and family by not being there. But the truth is known that if Aang had been there when the Fire Nation attacked, he would have been killed. So the interesting thing to wonder is what would have happened if Aang stayed behind with the Airbenders? What if he had been there during the attack? What if he died? And for the sake of it, let's question what if Katara had been the Avatar instead while we're at it. Welcome to the Amagi. Before we begin, only 25% of our viewers are subscribed, so if you're a fan of the video, please like and double check if you are subscribed. And with that out of the way, let's get into it. Katara was running through the snow of Wolf Cove. She was a happy girl. Despite the constant raids on the Southern Water Tribe, they had a relatively peaceful life. The Southern Water Tribe was devoid of all waterbenders, however, due to the raids that saw the benders taken away. Katara was the last to remain, the only bender. For a long time, however, they knew that she was something special, and it became all too clear to Kaya and Hakoda why the Fire Nation continued to attack. They were searching for far more than just a waterbender. They were searching for the waterbender. They were searching for the Avatar himself, or herself as it was currently. Katara was the symbol of hope to the world, and despite the fact that Hakoda, as a warrior, wanted to shout from the rooftops that the Avatar was here, as a father he feared what might happen to her if she were not properly prepared. And so they continued to hide her, and Hakoda continued to wage war, hoping to keep the Fire Nation too busy to pay any mind to the devastated Wolf Cove. But it would so happen that word spread. How did it spread? Why did it spread? This was unknown. But spread it did, and the steam of Fire Nation ships were on the horizon. Not long after this, the Fire Nation rolled into their village, searching for the Avatar, which, by reports, had been there. During the raid, Katara witnessed her mother being interrogated by a Fire Nation soldier who demanded to know who the Avatar was. Kaya would tell Katara to leave the house, but the soldier grew interested in her daughter, and instead would try to draw her in. Kaya would attempt to dissuade the soldier from this, but he instead grew ever more curious. Why was it that this woman was attempting to protect this child from him? Was this child more than she seemed? He reached out and grabbed her. In fear, Katara pulled back. She raised her hand, and the water that had been pooling from the ever-melting ice circled around the soldier's feet, freezing him in place. "A dirty waterbender," he said as he freed himself with his fire. He would toss Katara into the wall in retaliation for her strike against him. He would draw closer and raise his fist to strike her with fire, but as soon as he did, Katara would let loose a blast of fire of her own. Whether this was natural potential or fear drawing on the past lives of the Avatar was unknown. Even Katara didn't know she could do this, but now that she had, it was over. Everyone had witnessed it. She'd bent 2 elements, a feat impossible for any normal person. This could mean only one thing. The soldier smiled as if realizing the promotion he would soon get. "Come here, little girl. The Fire Lord's gonna want to meet you." Kaya would suddenly grab a nearby vase and throw it into the soldier's head. However, before she could strike the skull of the Fire Nation soldier, he would send a blast of flames straight into her, point blank, knocking her back and into the ground. Katara saw all of this before her very eyes. "Mother!" she cried. The Fire Nation soldier turned around to Katara and began to draw closer. "Unless you want that to happen to you, I suggest you come quietly." Katara's eyes began to overflow with tears. She hadn't even heard what the man said. He reached down and grabbed her. "Did you hear me? Do you want to die?" She was startled by him. "I don't want to die," she cried out. And as if every Avatar that had ever been had heard her cries at once, her eyes began to glow. An intense wind and pressure blasted out and knocked the Fire Nation soldier away. He attempted to get away, but the entire structure around him began to crumble to pieces, all pulled into the vortex of wind, water, and fire that was Katara's Avatar state. The other Fire Nation soldiers witnessed this and began to converge upon her, but as they did, Katara raised her hand and formed ice below their feet, and grabbed them and held them in place. Unable to move, Katara would crush the stones and fire them out at the benders, killing many by shredding them to pieces, and those that remained alive would be killed when Katara breathed out a heavy flame that ate the soldier's flesh to the bone. "Katara!" a voice called out. "Katara!" Braving the storm, an elderly pair of feet fought against the wind and ice to get to her granddaughter. "Katara, it's okay, it's okay." The glowing eyes of Katara looked back at her grandmother, stoic as ever, yet tears flowing down. "It's okay to cry, my dear. Let it out, and let it all go." The storm died down as Katara hugged onto her grandmother tightly. Gran, they killed Mom." After this, a letter would be sent to Hakoda, telling him of the events that had transpired. Due to this, he would rush home immediately. If it came to be known that the Avatar was still in Wolf Cove, then a greater fleet would be sent to crush them. Upon his return, he'd be greeted by Kana, who would inform him of everything she saw. He knew that it was time for the Water Tribe to forsake Wolf Cove, and so he informed everyone of what was going to happen to their village, and he told them to scatter. Many wished to stay and fight for their homes, but Hakoda told them that the Water Tribe is a people, not a place, and that so long as they survived, their way of life would as well. During this time, Hakoda would inform Katara that she was the Avatar, telling her that from a young age she had displayed potential in more than one element, which they immediately knew meant she was the Avatar. Katara was scared, as was Sokka, who was himself greatly disappointed in himself for not being there to protect his mother. Kana told them that the fate of the world rested upon Katara, and only a fully realized Avatar could stand up against the Fire Nation. But where to begin? The only place where waterbenders still existed, the Northern Water Tribe. And so Katara, Sokka, and Hakoda set out with Kana to the Northern Water Tribe. They were at sea for what seemed like forever, braving storm and ice, sneaking past Fire Nation flotillas and blockades. If the Fire Nation knew that Katara was in Wolf Cove, then there was no telling what else they knew. It was paramount that they reach the Water Tribe before the Fire Nation had a chance to track them. But after much time had passed on their long journey, they reached the gates of the Northern Water Tribe. These would be opened for their brethren from the south, and they would be let inside. There they proceeded to meet with the Chief of the North, who commended them for surviving the long journey, and who promised protection. But upon hearing that Katara was the Avatar, Arnok realized that their chance to finally turn the tide of war had come. So he commanded that their greatest waterbending master, a man named Pakku, would train her. This, however, caused a bit of an uncomfortable situation, as Kana would later explain that Pakku was at one time her fiancé. Despite this, Pakku proceeded to begin training Katara as per the duty he had bestowed upon him by Chief Arnok. "Your stance is awful," Pakku said as he walked around her. "You're so stiff. Are you working backwards? It is water that forms ice, not the other way around. Loosen your shoulders, broaden your stance, and keep your knees relaxed." Katara would follow every command she gave. She didn't like his bossy nature, but he was a master after all, and it seemed that she was going to have to get used to it, because he likely wasn't the only master she would ever have. "Show me what you can do. Lift the water from the vase and circle it around you a couple times before putting it back." Katara raised her hand and lifted a little water into the air. More. The whole vase. Katara only managed to get about a quarter of the water into the air before accidentally dropping it back into the water. "Not a bad attempt, am I right?" Katara asked, fishing for a compliment. Pakku looked to her with a disappointed expression on his face. "I was going to judge you based on how many water droplets you lost during the test. I can't grade the finished project when you don't even have the ability to begin with." Katara groaned. It seemed like this was going to be a lot harder than she thought. Katara would continue to train under Pakku for quite some time. During that time, rumors were swirling around that Fire Lord Azulon had died and had been succeeded by a new Fire Lord, Ozai. Ozai was the newest Fire Lord, but he was already making a name for himself. His reputation was already reaching out toward the Northern Water Tribe, telling of his cruelty. This only forced Katara to work harder, as it was her duty to stop him. Katara continued to train until she felt she had a good grasp on it. She believed she had mastered it, but Pakku refused to see it that way. He said that she had far too much to learn to be called a master and demanded that she stay longer to train. But Katara was getting restless. She could always work on it by herself. Pakku told her that she was being too impatient and that only time could make her see things the way he did. Katara declared that she didn't need to be old to see the truth, and because of this, a challenge to a duel was issued. Katara wasn't certain that she could beat him, not as she was, but she knew that she needed to get to the next teacher if she was to stop this new Fire Lord before things got too messy. Pakku would glide around Katara with his ice, a technique that actually surprised her. "This is but a simple trick. It's the first one I teach the children. If you can't even do this, do you truly dare to call yourself a master?" Katara would raise her hand, causing the path ahead to form spikes to trip Pakku. Pakku, however, would avoid them and instead fire the attack back at Katara. She would just barely dodge it. Pakku would jump to the ground and raise his hand, trapping Katara in ice. "Face it, you'll never save the world with these skills." Katara grit her teeth. "I will save the world if it's the last thing I do. If you keep me here, then there won't be any world left for me to save." She suddenly shattered the ice. She fell to her knees. Pakku smiled softly for a moment. "Just like your grandmother, stubborn to the end." He kneels down by Katara. It takes more than just training to master the elements. I think you have the guts. If you feel the need to continue on, you have my blessing. There's nothing more that I can teach you, Pakku said. He helped her up. After this, the two of them went to Chief Arnook and informed him that their training was over. Arnook, pleased with the speed at which Katara was progressing, would offer her a vessel to go to the Earth Kingdom. Katara, Sokka, and Hakoda gratefully accepted it. They began to stock food for their voyage. They weren't sure where they would go next. That was when Pakku approached them. I know you may be confused as to what you need to do next, but I just wanted to tell you, Katara, that a certain group has been founded, dedicated to continuing on in the spirit of the Avatar. I am a member of this group, and one of its bending masters, but I'm not the only one. What I want you to do is go to the city of Omashu next. There, find King Bumi. Approach him and ask for training. If he seems reluctant, present him with this, and tell him that Grandmaster Pakku sends his regards. Pakku handed Katara a pie showpiece, a lotus tile. She thanks Master Pakku. However, before they leave, Kana informs them that she plans to stay in the Northern Water Tribe. Sokka and Katara especially are disappointed to hear this, but Hakoda understands. Kana tells the children that she's growing too old to go on an adventure like this, and that she's decided to stay in the Northern Water Tribe to connect with an old friend. But before Katara and the others depart for the Earth Kingdom, Gran tells her that she believes in her, and that she knows that Katara will be able to do anything she sets her mind to. And so, with tears in their eyes, they say goodbye to the grandmother, leaving the Northern Water Tribe behind, headed for the Earth Kingdom and the great city of Omashu, the only city besides Ba Sing Se to have never fallen to the Fire Kingdom. Upon reaching the city, they see just how guarded it is, and find that the only way they can enter is by sneaking. Despite this, Katara doesn't waver in her faith that King Bumi will train her. The group sets out for the castle where they meet with the king, only after grabbing his attention at the gate while a guard is continually telling them they can't enter. Upon hearing that Grandmaster Pakku sent them, King Bumi grows interested. You know, it's dangerous to be throwing that name around, he says to her. The walls have ears. Those who use that name had best know what they're talking about. Katara then held out the White Lotus tile. I was told to come find you. I am the Avatar. I need training if I am to turn the tide of this war. Bumi would look at the tile and then back at Katara, and then back at the tile before tossing it back to her. Well, why didn't you say so? It's so nice to see you again, Aang. What happened to your arrow? Katara looks to the others with confusion, a gaze that lingers when she returns her attention to King Bumi. The elderly man then waves it off and orders the guard to open the gate. He leads them inside. As they go deeper, they go to the throne room where King Bumi sits upon his throne. It's been quite a few years since I've seen the Avatar. Where have you been? Katara looks around at the others in her group. I don't know how to answer that. Bumi looks her over. I would assume that you are Water Tribe, yes? This means you appeared just after the air. But it's been 100 years. Where have you been so long? You can't be more than 14 years old, and the war's been going on for 100 years. Once again, Katara responded with, I don't know. King Bumi almost began to feel bad for her, as it seemed that she only recently came to realize that she was the Avatar. So, tell me more about yourself. Where did you come from? Why do you fight? She would begin to speak. I am Katara. I come from the Southern Water Tribe, a little village called Wolf Cove. I was constantly attacked by the Fire Nation due to the many benders that would crop up there. Not long ago, the Fire Nation attacked the village, and my mother was killed defending me. I don't want the same thing to happen to anyone else, so I will fight against the Fire Nation. Bumi nodded, acknowledging her reasons. Well, no time like the present. He stood up and began to lead her to what seemed like an arena. Once he was there, he began his instruction. Bending the element of earth is very different from bending the element of water. For water, it's generally taught to go with the flow, but such a thing doesn't work with rocks, as rocks are notoriously stubborn and immobile. That's why, when bending the element of stone, you must have a strong stance and a strong will. You can't ask the stones to move, you must demand that they move. And when they do, you shove them. You show the stones who their master is. If you can show the stones you're their master, you will be their master. You will be a master of earthbending. And so the two began their training, which took plenty of time and diligence. For a while though, Katara felt like she wasn't getting anywhere, and despite her growing tired, King Bumi refused to allow her to rest. He would work her to exhaustion and then work her some more. He worked her until she could no longer stand and would then have her taken to her room to rest. As soon as she was done resting, he would let her eat before demanding that she continue. Katara had no idea how Bumi could do this. For someone of his age, he certainly had the strength to go non-stop for hours or even days. Katara came to realize that this was because of sheer determination, and the only way to master earthbending was to mimic his way of doing things. Slowly but surely, she began to make progress. Eventually, she was lifting stones and throwing them as if they were nothing. Bumi would congratulate her on her completion of her training and would recommend that she find a firebending master, something that Katara was not enthusiastic about it. Bumi suggested that they find Zhang Zhang, as he was no longer a member of the Fire Nation Navy and was now a member of the White Lotus. Confused as to where they were supposed to go, Bumi informs her that the Lotus's agents had informed him that Zhang Zhang was in a nearby village, once more fleeing the Fire Nation's advance due to his desertion. Katara would thank King Bumi for his help and would proceed to leave Omashu with her father and brother for the village. Upon entering into the village, Katara sought help from Zhang Zhang, who they found in an abandoned house. At first, Zhang Zhang seemed reluctant to even speak with them, avoiding the group as much as he could. It was only after Katara mentioned the Order of the White Lotus, her own status as the Avatar, and displayed a lotus tile from Pakku that he agreed to teach her. But he warned her that it could take time, and that she would have to be patient. He told her that firebending was an art of great danger, as fire lived to consume, just as the Fire Nation, the embodiment of fire, were proving. Zhang Zhang would have her sit by herself, and would give her a leaf that he had begun to burn in the center. Keep this flame from reaching the edges. Concentrate on it, and refuse to let it pass. Katara would agree and begin to do this. To her credit, she was displaying incredible potential. She was able to indeed keep it from reaching the other end for a time, but after a while the leaf did burn. Katara felt as though she had failed, but her father told her to pick it back up again. She would inform Zhang Zhang, who told her that she was obviously afraid of the fire. Katara admitted that this was so due to past trauma and experience. Zhang Zhang understood, but told her that even the things we fear must have proper attention paid to them. Katara mentioned her fear that she might hurt someone. Zhang Zhang would tell her that this is why he is training her as he was. Fire can be dangerous when uncontrolled, but when in control, it becomes a tool of life. He told her that uncontrolled firebending is like a forest fire. It spreads and causes pain and destroys everything in its path. But then he said that the kind of firebending he was teaching her was like the sun. It was a source of light and heat, the ultimate form of fire in the universe. And it was not dangerous, but instead gave life to the world. He reminded her that campfires are built at night to keep others warm, safe, and out of the darkness. He reminded her that fire indeed was a weapon of pain, but when controlled, it became a weapon that would only destroy that which she chose to destroy, and nothing she didn't. This gave Katara some comfort. Zhang Zhang gave her another leaf to attempt to train her in firebending mastery. She managed to keep the flames from reaching the edges of the leaf for about 24 hours straight. The willpower she had learned from King Bumi was helping out too. It seemed as if the principles of other bending styles could overlap. With that test having been completed, patience and proper respect for the element of fire having been achieved, Zhang Zhang would proceed to show her how to generate fire, which wasn't as hard as it seemed. All she needed to really do was the same thing she did when refusing to let fire on the leaf spread. However, she was doing it in reverse, aiding the flame creation with breathing techniques. Careful, Zhang Zhang said. It is important to remember that the flames you wield must have perfect control. Only use as much flame as is required to accomplish the task with it, and only touch with it that you are willing to burn. And so Katara would continue her training, learning and honing her skills, controlling them and keeping them strong. Her willingness to learn and willingness to follow instruction was nothing short of remarkable. She was a bit stubborn, but she possessed enough wisdom to listen to reason and to properly control her flames. As time passed, Zhang Zhang told her that he had nothing left to teach, and that in truth, all she had to do was continue to practice what he had taught her daily, make it into muscle memory, and she would be fine. There was then only one element for her to learn, air, but that was the issue. There were no air nomads left to teach her. What could she do? Zhang Zhang made mention of the things that the Lotus had set up for this. They began to devote time and effort to discovering a way to help the Avatar in such a scenario, and even though no airbenders existed any longer, that did not mean that their ways had completely died out. Zhang Zhang informed Katara that the White Lotus had discovered a man that could help her. He resided at the Eastern Air Temple, and despite being a non-bender, knew more about bending than most benders could ever hope to learn. But the path to the Eastern Air Temple would be long and hard, as it resided on a mountaintop. Sokka and Hakoda would assure Katara that it would be okay, as it was their job to help her get to places so she could fulfill her destiny. And so they set out for the Eastern Air Temple. The journey was hard. It was long, and it was very roundabout. Hakoda had been keeping tabs on the war and the many sorties and campaigns that were occurring across the world, and given the importance of Katara and her mission, they couldn't risk the Fire Nation discovering her. So they had to move up closer to the eastern side of Ba Sing Se and come down to the mountains from the Upper Peninsula to avoid conflict, which extended their travel time immensely. But finally they crossed over the sea and made it to the island with which the mountains of the Eastern Air Temple were located. They began to climb the mountains. Upon reaching the top, they were astounded by the architecture of the temple and wondered how it was that the air nomads could build something like this atop such a huge mountain. But what surprised Sokka most of all was the concept that someone could live up here. They ventured into the old temple, where they came across an elderly man with a white beard. He introduced himself as Pathik, a guru who had studied the ancient arts and spirituality. He knew from the start that Katara was the Avatar due to a vision he had of this very moment, and said that he knew that she'd be coming very soon to meet him when he sensed the cosmic energy coming from the Southern Water Tribe. Katara would sit with him and ask if he could teach her the art of airbending. Pathik lamented that he could not serve as the best teacher to do that for her, but said that he knew how to get her to train with a real airbender, and all she needed to do was master the Avatar state. Katara questioned how she could do that, and Pathik smiled and told her that the Avatar state was what he could help her with, and would be able to show her a realm of power she had never known. He would lead her to a peaceful waterfall and would there have her sit down and be calm. The guru sat there with her and told her that it was best that they started from the ground up. He went with her on a spiritual journey into her own mind, and there they began working to cleanse the chakras from the bottom up. He told her that it was blocked by fear, and told her that she had much fear in her as the result of her status as the Avatar. He understood that such responsibilities came with pressure to be perfect, and that it was only natural to be afraid. But he told her that the best way to deal with this fear is to realize that whatever will be, that she shouldn't focus on what others tell her it means to be a good Avatar, and instead do her best. Even if she fails, she fulfilled her duty as Avatar by at least trying. But he said that her fear hinged on so many other things as well, some of which were blocking other chakras. So they continued up. Next was the water chakra, blocked by guilt. He said that her chakra was being blocked specifically by her guilt at not being able to protect her mother. Her guilt that it was somehow her fault because she was born as the Avatar. He once again told her that whatever happens is what is meant to happen, and that it follows a plan set out for them. There should be no guilt over the death of her mother, as her mother was one who had helped Katara get to where she was now. Without her mother's death, Katara might have never been able to complete her training as the Avatar as quickly as she had. Her death had given Katara strength, and it was a gift to her from a loving mother. It was not something she should blame herself for, but instead something she should be grateful for. This recommendation would follow up into the next chakras, which were being blocked by shame and grief. He told her that it was okay to feel the way she was feeling about her mother's death. As he told her this, Katara began to break down into tears, which could only show Pathik the true pain in her heart. The loss was still fresh to Katara, but she needed to push past it. You feel ashamed because you did not attempt to fight back when your mother was being killed. You were afraid, Katara, and that's okay. You're human like the rest of us, and fear is a natural part of life. The one thing living beings hate doing most is dying, because when they die, they feel like they're not living beings anymore, and people don't want to let go of that. But you must look at this from your mother's perspective. She fought to protect you, and died because she loved you. Even if you were scared, you were a child. You still are, and you've come so far despite your fear. So ask yourself this, would your mother forgive you? Katara nodded. She would. Pathik smiled. Then what you should do next is forgive yourself. From there, he began to tackle her grief by reminding her that even though her mother was dead, it did not mean she was gone. She may have left the world as it was, but that did not mean that she wasn't still with Katara in spirit. And so, as long as Katara remembered that her mother's spirit was alive somewhere, even if distant, the bond that connected them in life would always keep them close. He told her that she wasn't in a party of 3 on this journey, but a party of 4, as the spirit of her mother was and would remain with her the entire time. This would bring a smile to Katara's face. He continued to help her cleanse her chakras until they reached the final one in the crown of her head. This one, when properly cleansed, would then finish cleansing the rest of them and allow her access to the Avatar state. Pathik told her that her fear of losing her brother and father, her fear of failure, and all her earthly responsibilities were just that, earthly. The spirit was greater than just the earth, and beyond this world laid one far better, far greater, and far happier. While it was hard for the Avatar to completely detach from worldly affairs, as their entire being was based around defending the world, it was important to know what to intervene with. The Avatar itself was a spirit that protected the world. Rava, having bonded with a human, he said that she needed to remember that her job was important, and that she could very well lose her father and brother and even die herself. But if she did, it was okay. After all, whatever God's will was for man, that was what would happen. And not even the Avatar could change that. The Avatar was an agent of change, not change itself. And change would come, with or without the Avatar, and balance tended to like to restore itself in its own way. He told her to let go of everything that weighed her down. If she could do this, she would attain the Avatar state. Suddenly, she was in the Avatar state. And once there, she met her airbending teacher, a shy little boy with an arrow on his head. She seemed a little shy as well. He recognized this and told her that it was okay. "I wasn't much in life. I never completed my training of the other elements, nor did I fulfill any destiny, and sometimes I feel bad about it. But that doesn't mean I wasn't the Avatar, and I can still help in my own way. I was the youngest airbending master in my temple, and could rival even the stronger monks. If you would allow me, I'd like to teach you." Katara would nod. "I would be honored to learn from you." As Katara was training in the Avatar state, Pathik decided to leave her for a time to check up on the others. There he saw Sokka and Hakoda. "You're the Avatar's family, right? I wouldn't suppose you're benders." They would shake their head. "Sadly not," Sokka said. "But I don't suppose you can teach us to become benders." Pathik shook his head. "The ability to become a bender is something one must be born with. But this doesn't mean you can't benefit from learning from me. After all, I too am a non-bender." Sokka sat forward. "What could you teach us?" Pathik smiled. "Have you ever heard of the concept of chi blocking?" The group trained for quite some time, with Katara studying airbending in the spirit world with Aang, and Sokka and Hakoda learning the basics of chi blocking from Pathik. Pathik showed Sokka and Hakoda all the best places to strike and how to strike them. It was a discipline that could take a long time to master, but they were at least capable of doing it to a passable degree by the time Katara woke up from her Avatar state. It felt as if she were finally a fully realized Avatar. They thanked Pathik and told him that they needed to be off to fulfill their destiny. Pathik offered them a little advice by telling them that there was a certain group of rebels in the capital city of the Fire Nation that had acquired plans for secret tunnels in and out of the castle. The rebel group had long since been destroyed, but if they went to their hideout, they might still find the maps. They once again thanked him for the help and began to descend the mountain. Once down, they knew that they would need to find a way to the capital city of the Fire Nation, so they would find and take the armor from 3 Fire Nation soldiers and would use them as disguises. They would then find ship manifests and would locate the first ship they saw that had orders to return to the Fire Nation. They boarded it. It was nerve-wracking being surrounded by those who wanted them dead. But the good news was that they did not know what Katara looked like, nor would they know Sokka from your average Joe. Hakoda might be a different story, but he recognized that he simply didn't have to take off his helmet. But he made his children promise to put the mission above him. He told them that no matter what happens to him, they can't do anything. Even if he's discovered and killed, they can't try to save him. That was a hard promise to make, but thankfully they never had to deal with it, as Hakoda's presence was never questioned. He blended in with the rest of the faceless soldiers who refused to remove their mask. As the ship pulled into the harbor, Katara, Sokka, and Hakoda all got off. They sought out and found the old rebel hideout, and found the tunnels into the castle. Still wearing the uniforms, the group snuck through the tunnels and made their way inside. As they made it into the throne room, they witnessed the Fire Lord. Ozai questioned them and asked what they were doing, intruding upon his solitude. Katara would remove her mask and helmet, and declare that she was there to restore balance. Ozai would grow angry with this and stand. He would walk through the flames and onto the floor. "The Avatar has come to put an end to my plans, Let's see how much that title's worth." Ozai would fire a blast of flame at them, to which Katara, Sokka, and Hakoda would jump out of the way. It was just then that Azula and Zuko walked into the room to inquire something of their father. Seeing them fight, they decided to aid their father, rushing in to take on the stragglers. Zuko would try to take Sokka, and Azula would take Hakoda. As the battle went on, Sokka and Hakoda would recall their chi blocking training and attempt to do so. Sokka, with his club in one hand and his index and middle fingers open in the left, attempted to dodge Zuko's fire and draw close. Hakoda did the same with Azula, but as he struck out at her, she realized what this was, as she had seen it before. "Chi blocking like Tai Li, eh? Perhaps I should show you why chi blocking is a forgotten art form." Azula would attempt to create distance so that she could attack, but Hakoda couldn't. Katara would be facing off against Ozai, striking out at him with flames, like he would do. It was obvious that he had the greater experience with this form of bending, so Katara would utilize water bending, pulling water from her pouch and swirling it around in front of her before turning it to icy spikes and firing them. Ozai would release a blast of fire from his mouth that melted the ice and evaporated the water. Katara barely dodged by dropping down. She would use airbending to sweep Ozai's feet, causing him to fall to the ground. Once he was down, he'd be trapped by earthbending. All the while, Sokka managed to get close and tap a few of Zuko's pressure points, blocking the flow of his chakra. Hakoda would throw his club at Azula from a distance. It barely grazed the side of her face, causing her to lose focus and turn her back to Hakoda. Hakoda used this as a chance to draw closer and block her chi, but it was all a ploy to get him to lower his guard. Azula smiled and turned back before killing Hakoda with a full-power fire blast to his chest. "Dad!" Katara and Sokka screamed in unison. At the same time, Ozai had broken free from the earth by melting it with his flames. He stood and looked at the body of Hakoda. "So let this be the fate of all who stand against the Fire Nation." Katara, eyes full of tears, turned to face Ozai, her eyes glowing pure white.
"No, let this be the fate of all those who stand against me."
A vortex of other elements began to swirl around her as she drew closer to Ozai. Sokka had turned his attention to Azula. She chuckled at him. "Are you going to attempt to block my chi as well?" "No, I'm gonna kill you." Sokka came closer and attempted to strike her with his club, but she crossed her arms and protected herself. He would then take from a pouch on the side of his leg a group of throwing knives. He would then throw them at Azula, striking her pressure points, causing her body to go numb. She looked up and couldn't move. Sokka stood over her, club raised high. "This is for my father." He swung the club down. All the while, Katara blew Ozai back. She would rise into the air and begin to increase the potency of her vortex, slowly pulling the entire room in with it. She looked to Sokka.
"Get outside."
He saw her and didn't hesitate. Running outside, he would wait. It sounded as if the whole building was coming down. He looked in and saw only dust. He silently prayed that she would be okay. There was a shadow coming through the dust toward him. He would raise his club, ready to strike. But it was Katara. She smiled weakly. "I did it." She would pass out then and there. Sokka would catch her. He heard the sound of guards barking orders from down the hall. He put her on his shoulders and began to make it out of the tunnels, where the two would steal a boat and escape under cover of night. With the Fire Lord and his heirs dead, there was nobody left to run the kingdom. The war ground to a halt. Other nations, seeing this decisive blowback, began to push back the Fire Nation into their own country. A coalition of Earth Kingdom warriors and Water Tribe warriors would take the capital city and force the Fire Nation to surrender. All the while, Katara and Sokka returned to the Northern Water Tribe to live with their grandmother and their new step-grandfather, Pakku. As the war came to an end, Katara embraced a different aspect of her avatarhood and turned into a peacekeeper. She would visit from nation to nation, helping them rebuild, and would even restore the monks to their air temples. None of them could airbend, but it was Pathik's belief that soon the elements would balance out, and those who followed the airbender's way of life would develop the ability to bend the element again. As the story of Katara came to a close, she became known as one of the most accomplished avatars in history, going down in the history books as the one who ended the 100-Year War. And that's where I plan to call it. I hope you enjoyed this video. I really enjoyed following this train of thought. My favorite part was when Katara trained under Pathik to awaken her chakras. I liked delving into the mental side of things and who Katara was as a character in that moment. I also felt that it was the perfect time to give Sokka and Hakoda a gimmick. I hope you didn't mind. But what was your favorite part? Let us know in the comments below. Be sure to like, subscribe, and ring the bell to be notified when we drop more videos like this. And if you can't wait for those, I highly recommend that you try these videos. Until next time, peace.